Hello, viewers of Cold Breath. Today I will tell you a story I encountered. If you find this story interesting, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so that I have the motivation to tell you more interesting stories. Rain of the rain. The rain began innocently enough. It started as a light drizzle, barely noticeable as I stood on the side of the empty highway, thumb out, waiting for a ride. I'd been walking for hours, and the idea of finding shelter seemed as distant as the last car that passed me by. The sun had long disappeared behind thick, brooding clouds, leaving the world a muted shade of gray. Then, the rain picked up. At first, I was just annoyed. My boots squelched with each step, the water creeping through the worn soles, chilling my feet. But as the rain fell harder, it became something else, something unnatural. Each drop hit the ground with a force far beyond what seemed possible. It felt more like tiny fists pummeling the earth, pounding the asphalt, pounding me. My skin tingled, the sharp sting of the rain biting through my jacket. I pulled my hood tight, trying to shield myself from the downpour, but the water seemed to find its way through every gap, soaking me to the bone. There was no place to hide, no shelter for miles, just me and the endless stretch of road. The wind howled through the trees, bending them as though they were made of rubber, and the air grew colder with every gust. I was alone. I trudged forward, hoping, praying that some car would come. But it was a dead road, just me in the rain. And then, out of nowhere, I saw headlights flicker far down the highway. Relief surged through me. I waved, stumbling into the road, barely able to make out the shape of the vehicle through the thick sheet of water. The car rolled up slowly, unnervingly slow, like it was sizing me up. When it stopped, the window slid down, and a voice, raspy and almost drowned out by the rain, called to me. "Need a ride?" I could barely see the driver, just the silhouette of someone behind the wheel, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to spend another second in that storm. I yanked the door open and collapsed into the passenger seat, drenched to the bone. The door shut with a heavy thud, muting the sound of the storm outside. "Thanks," I said, trying to get comfortable. But the air in the car felt wrong, thick, like the rain was still inside, heavy and damp. "No problem," the driver said, his voice strange like he hadn't spoken in years. "This storm can swallow you whole." I glanced over at him, but the dim light of the dashboard only cast shadows over his face. His features seemed blurred, out of focus. I shook my head, wiping rain from my eyes, convinced the storm had just messed with my vision. "You don't see many people out here," I said, trying to make small talk, but there was something off about the air in the car. It felt too quiet inside, almost trapped. I turned back, and the car, it wasn't there anymore. There was no car, no driver, only rain. The rain formed tendrils, thick ropes of water wrapping around my legs, pulling at me, dragging me down into the pooling water on the road. I gasped for air, clawing at the ground, my vision blurring as the rain pounded into my head, my chest suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, everything went wet and black. Suddenly, a loud blaring noise pierced through the fog of my mind, followed by a flash of blinding light. A car horn. I jolted awake, gasping for breath, my body stiff and unresponsive. For a moment I didn't know where I was, my vision blurred, and the cold, biting rain stung my skin. I blinked, struggling to focus. Headlights shone directly into my eyes, so bright they made my head pound. I was standing, frozen by the side of the road, soaked to the bone. My clothes clung to me like ice, my limbs numb. I had no idea how long I'd been standing there, completely unaware, just lost to the storm. A car had pulled up in front of me, its horn still reverberating through the rain-soaked air. I shuddered, barely able to move, my body shaking violently from the cold. My legs felt weak, like they hadn't moved in hours. I forced myself to take a breath, the air cutting into my lungs as I raised a trembling hand to shield my eyes from the harsh glare of the headlights. The driver's window rolled down, and a voice called out, sharp and impatient. "I've been honking for ages. Are you okay? Or do you have a death wish? Get in the car, man." I blinked hard, trying to make sense of the voice. My pulse raced, my mind struggling to catch up, still disoriented from whatever had just happened. I glanced down at myself, dripping wet, my fingers blue and stiff. I hadn't even noticed how cold I was until now, standing there like a statue, completely numb to everything. The driver leaned forward, a hint of concern slipping into his frustration. "You've been standing there like a zombie. You need help or what?" I staggered forward, my legs shaky and unsteady. This car was different. The driver, his voice, he sounded real. Not like before. At least, I hoped he was real. I hesitated for a second longer, then, shivering uncontrollably, I opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat, the warmth of the car hitting me like a shock to my system. As the door clicked shut, I sank into the seat, still dazed, still not fully sure of what had just happened to me. "No, the locals won't come out when it rains around the mountain," the driver answered, his tone slow and deliberate. I blinked. "Can't blame them. Where are you off to?" The driver let out a low chuckle, and I swore I saw his face shift in the dark, like it wasn't fixed in place. "The rain," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It has a way of getting into you. You're lucky I picked you up." My heart thudded in my chest. I stared out the window, watching the rain streak down in thick, unnatural lines, almost like it was crawling. The drops didn't fall like they should have. They slithered. And the sound of it, the endless drumming on the roof, it wasn't right either. It felt like it was talking to me, calling out in a language I couldn't understand. I glanced back at the driver. "What do you mean by getting into you?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving, but slower, as if the car was struggling to push through the storm. I watched the windshield wipers struggle against the rain, which seemed to fall harder now, like it wanted to punch through the glass. The inside of the car started to feel wrong. The windows fogged up, and the air felt thicker, wetter. I could taste the rain, even inside. I wiped at the window, but my hand came away wet, slick with condensation that felt too thick to be just water. His face was more visible now, but something was terribly wrong. His skin looked damp, swollen. His eyes were dull, as though the life had drained out of them. I gasped, pulling back against my seat. I could feel my breath quicken, my chest tightening. The rain wasn't just falling, it was everywhere, creeping through the seams of the car, soaking into my clothes even though I was inside. I glanced at my hands, and they looked bloated, pale, like they'd been soaking in water for days. I looked down and gasped. The floor of the car was flooding, water rising up to my ankles, swirling thick and black. It was seeping in from everywhere, from the cracks in the windows, from the seams of the doors, from the driver himself. I looked over in horror as I realized what was happening. The driver wasn't just driving in the rain. He was the rain. His form shifted and twisted, his body becoming translucent, watery, his skin rippling like the surface of a pond. His eyes, empty sockets, stared through me as his mouth opened, releasing a choking, wet laugh. I screamed and shoved at the door, slamming my shoulder into it with everything I had. It burst open, and I tumbled out onto the soaked asphalt. I scrambled to my feet, but the rain was all around me, relentless, pounding. It felt alive, like it was pulling me down, trying to drag me into the road.